It gives me a great deal of pleasure to have the privilege to discuss with you this evening or this afternoon a subject that in my opinion should be of importance and of interest to everybody. I am to discuss for you an intelligent person's way of life. Let us think for a minute of a basis for a way of life. To begin with, let us think of man as an organic complex. Now by this I mean actually a living organism. We can say that man is one type of organic complex, that a worm is another type, that an elephant is another type, that a bird is another type, and so on. We have many types of organic complexes in nature. We find in the study of these various organic complexes that they have certain basic or fundamental needs that must be met, and they must be adequately met if these different types of life are to have health and strength. Animals meet their needs instinctively. Man probably originally met his needs also in the same way. We may think of man as beginning his career upon this earth from scratch. He had no teachers to instruct him. He had no army of scientists that he could follow. He had no store of experience and no stored up results of research. He had no schools and no colleges to which he could attend to learn the ways of life. He had to go it alone. I remember that during World War II, a little booklet of instructions was issued to the members of our Air Force. And in there they were instructed that if they were shot down in the South Pacific and they managed to survive on one of the islands, they were not to eat of the fruit of those islands indiscriminately, but they were to watch the monkeys and the apes to see what foods they ate. And if the monkeys and apes ate a particular food, then it was supposed to be safe for the aviators to eat. But if they rejected them, then these men should also reject them. Now I cannot conceive of our primitive ancestors going to school to monkeys and apes to learn how to eat. I cannot conceive of them following monkeys and apes around and watching them eat to see what they should eat. Man must have had some guide, some instinctive guide, to tell him not only when to eat and what to eat, but how much to eat and how to eat it. And in the same way, he must have had some instinctive means of determining what else to do in order to meet the requirements of life. Otherwise, he would not have survived. Otherwise, you and I would not be here this afternoon. So we may think of him purely as a living being and ask ourselves, what did he do? How did he live? Well, we'll say that when he was hungry, he ate. Now, what did he eat? Well, obviously he ate food because nothing else would meet the requirements of his body for food. Nothing else would satisfy his hunger. He ate food, but what kind of food did he eat? Well, inasmuch as he had not developed means and processes of refining and processing his food, he ate natural foods. He ate them unprocessed, unrefined. They were not denatured. They were not devitaminized. They were not demineralized. They were not chemically preserved. They were not colored and flavored artificially. They were foods as old Mother Nature produced them. He ate them whole. He ate them entire. He got all of the food elements from his diet. He got all of the vitamins and all of the minerals and all of the other food factors that are requisite to good nutrition. He had not learned to make fire, so he ate his food uncooked. He did not have the great abundance and the great variety of food that we have today, so he ate simple meals. Perhaps, as we find among the lower animals, he ate one food at a meal, or at most one or two. He did not eat a 7-course dinner or a 21-course dinner. He did not complicate the digestive process as we do today. He did not mix his foods indiscriminately as we do today. We may go back into the Bible, which hardly takes us back to primitive times, but it may bring over into into prehistoric times many of the primitive practices. We find in the book of Exodus the Jews complaining very much about not having flesh. They complained that Moses and Aaron had led them out of Egypt to let them starve to death in the wilderness. They were very much disappointed because they didn't have all the flesh pots that they had been accustomed to while in bondage in Egypt. So God said to Moses, "Say unto the children of Israel that they shall have flesh in the evening and bread in the morning." And then the rest of the chapter details how they received their flesh. Quails, great numbers of quails flew into the camp, and they captured and killed quails for their evening meal. The next morning they picked up manna off the ground, which had settled there during the night, for their bread in the morning. We get considerable amount of information about this in the chapter. The point I want to bring out is that here they ate one thing at a meal, and they kept their starches and their proteins separate. They ate them, ate one of them at one meal and the other at the other meal. In other words, they didn't abuse their digestive function by eating foods that require different types of digestive juices for their digestion, as we do today. Now, this is only part of the eating habits of early man, but I have told you enough to show you a contrast between the practices, the eating practices of our ancestors, and the eating practices that we have developed in civilized life, particularly during the past 200 years, and more especially during the past 50. We tend to think of our eating habits as being normal or natural. We tend to think of them as having been carried on by our ancestors throughout all time that man has been on the earth. Some of us imagine that Adam and Eve had a cook stove in the Garden of Eden. They didn't. As a matter of fact, cook stoves are rather modern inventions. So we may say that man ate natural foods, that he ate them simply, that he ate simple meals. He didn't have the abundance of food that we have today, so he ate moderately as a matter of necessity. He was confined almost exclusively to the foods that grew in his own vicinity. There were no fast-going ocean liners, there were no fast and refrigerated freight trains, there were no aeroplanes, there were no motor trucks to bring food to him from great distances. So he was confined in his eating habits to foods that grew in his own vicinity. This means, of course, that at all times he was forced to eat abstemiously. He was not a glutton as we are today. We know from history that our ancestors ate 1 and 2 meals a day. We know actually that the 3-meal plan is less than 200 years old. But we have gone back in this country. Within recent years, we have gone back to the 1-meal-a-day plan. Americans no longer eat 3 meals a day. They eat only 1 meal a day, but they take all day to eat it. They start eating in the morning when they first arise, and they nibble all day long, and they keep eating until time to go to bed at night, and some of them actually get up after they've been in bed a while and eat some more. We boast that we're the best fed people in the world. We boast that we're the best fed people in history. Actually, we're the most overfed, even if we're not well fed. I remember a patient of mine whom I had when I practiced in New York a number of years ago, who had come to this country from Italy not many years before. And he said to me, when I came to this country and saw how you Americans eat, I said to myself, these people eat 3 banquets a day. Then he added, in Italy we don't have that much food. Well, neither do they have as much cancer, or Bright's disease, or diabetes, or insanity, or nervous troubles, and other so-called degenerative diseases of later life as we have in this country. They have better teeth than we have. In many ways, they're better off than we are. But now let's forget for a moment about man's eating practices in the past and in the present, and think of something else. Man lived an active outdoor life. He had not learned to build cities. We are crowding into the cities today as we never have before in history. The small towns and the villages are disappearing. The large towns are growing by leaps and bounds. The farm population is decreasing. Today we see small farms disappearing and big farms with combines taking their places. And we crowd more and more into the cities. We're working more and more in mills and mines and factories. We're getting out of the fresh air and out of the sunshine. We're getting away from a normal life, and we're getting away from our natural and normal contacts with the sources of existence. You go into the city today, and they don't ask you anymore to go out with them for a breath of fresh air. They say, let's go out and get a breath of carbon monoxide. Because there's no fresh air in the cities. And the larger they get, the worse the air becomes. The larger they get, the more they live in caves and caverns and in the lower part of canyons, and the less sunshine they get. So that we're not getting the elements of a healthy life in our modern living. Our ancestors, before they learned to make clothes, spent their day in the sunshine nude. They didn't have to take sunbaths. Sunshine was an everyday part of their living. They didn't have to go out and make a special effort to get it, because it was just a part of life. And the fresh air was equally a part of life. Today, we aren't getting sunshine to our bodies. Not only do we live in sunless homes and apartments, but we also clothe ourselves in such a way that the sun never reaches us, unless we take sunbaths. Many of us today recognize the value of sunshine, but we don't use it. And the larger the city, the less likely we are to get into the sun. We're not in the fresh air, and we're not in the sunshine. And our ancestors were. Now, these things are part of the elemental needs of life, as much so as food. And we're not getting it. It behooves us then to reorganize our way of life so that we can have fresh air and sunshine. When our ancestors were thirsty, they drank. Now, what did they drink? Well, they hadn't learned to make wine and beer and whiskey and rum and brandy and vodka and tequila and mezcal and the various other alcoholic beverages that we take today. They hadn't learned to brew tea and coffee. They didn't know anything about Coca-Cola and chocolate. They had not learned to make soft drinks. Now, all of these soft drinks are poisonous, just as are these other substances that I've mentioned. So what did they drink? Well, thirst is a demand on the part of the organism for water, and they drank water. As a matter of fact, that is the only drink we have today. Everything else is either food or poison. Fruit juices, vegetable juices, milk, soups, these are foods. Alcohol, tea, coffee, cocoa, chocolate, soda fountain slops, these are poisons. Water is our only drink, and this is what our ancestors drank. They drank water when they were thirsty. They didn't drink 8 glasses of water a day because somebody told them that's what they needed. They didn't stop at 6 because somebody else said you need 6 glasses of water a day. They drank according to the demands of thirst, which is the normal, the natural, the instinctive way of drinking. Not by arbitrary standards, but by need, as indicated by physiological demand, which we call thirst. So they ate when they were hungry, and they drank when they were dry. They rested when they were tired. They slept when they were sleepy. They sought warmth when they were cold. They sought a cool, shady place when they were hot. Our whole mode of living is absolutely contrary to any possible normal or natural way of life. I mentioned a while ago that milk is food rather than drink. Our ancestors did not drink milk because they had not domesticated milk animals. The cow, the goat, the camel, the deer, and other animals that are used to provide milk, provided man with no milk until after they were domesticated. Now, this put the women of the time in the position where they had to nurse their own babies. And I can't conceive of our primitive ancestors, especially the women, deigning to call upon a cow or a goat to function as the mother of their children. If they hadn't been better mothers, far better mothers, than the average woman of today, you and I wouldn't be sitting here today. Their young would have starved to death. If the cows and the sheep, or rather the cows and the goats of the country, were to suddenly become as poor mothers as our mothers are today, I don't know what would happen to the next few generations. I doubt that they'd survive, because our mothers can't nurse their children anymore. Now, why can't they? Because their food is such that it will not produce milk. You can't produce milk out of white flour and white sugar and white rice and canned fruits and vegetables and embalmed meats and pasteurized milk and cigarettes and beer and hot dogs and sandwiches and coffee and cake and pie and foods of that type. You can't produce milk out of that kind of food any more than you can produce healthy flesh out of that kind of food. We are not nourishing ourselves. Our mothers are not eating properly in that they can produce milk that will nourish their babies. So it's a good thing that we have the cow and the goat. It's a bad thing in one way. If we didn't have them, we would be forced to find a means of producing healthy mothers, vigorous mothers, efficient mothers, adequate mothers, in order to bring forth the next generation. A few days ago, well, to be exact, the day before Easter, a baby was born in Austin, Texas. Now, there were many babies born. Perhaps there were several born in Austin, Texas that day. But this one particular baby that I want to tell you about. The mother did not know that the child was being born because there was no pain associated with the birth. And the child was almost emerging from the vagina before she realized what was happening. Had the midwife that took care of the case not been in the house with her, she had moved in 3 or 4 days ahead. Had she not been there, she never would have gotten there in time to officiate at the birth. And there was no pain. This was a nearly normal birth. I say nearly normal because birth should not merely be painless, it should be pleasurable. Did you ever watch a female cat giving birth to a half a dozen kittens, lying there purring as though she's enjoying life while the kittens are being born? This is an example of what birth should be, a pleasurable experience. Mothers should welcome it. They shouldn't want to be anesthetized. They should want to go through the experience because it should be pleasurable. But to go back, during the summer while I was in the process of building my new institution, this mother and her husband, who were both attending the University of Texas, came up on the hill where I was building the place to see me. And the wife said, I am pregnant, and I don't want a physician, and I don't want to go to a hospital. What can I do? Well, Austin is about 70 miles away, so I said the best I can do is to instruct you as to how to take care of yourself through the balance of your pregnancy and give you the name of one of the best midwives in the United States who lives there in Austin. And that was done, and she followed out the instructions, and the baby was born without pain. The grandmothers and grandfathers of the baby live in San Antonio, so there is quite a buzz in both cities about the birth of this child. This is something that we can do. This was the woman's first child. She was a young woman. This is something that we can do in the great majority of cases of women, if we can only interest them in a way of life that conforms to the laws of life and get them to cease depending upon drugs and hypnotism as a means of relieving the pains, not the pains that are due to childbirth, but the pains that are due to a way of life that builds trouble. It's now 15 years ago. A woman in San Antonio gave birth in her 41st year to her first baby. Now that is an age of life when it is usually considered rather unsafe for a first child. we think we're going to have a lot of difficulty if the first child comes late in life. And yet in her 41st year, she gave birth to her baby without anesthetics, without drugs, without so-called instrumentation, without help. And when it was over with, she remarked to me, "I thought it was supposed to hurt." And I said, "Well, conventionally it does hurt, but it isn't supposed to. Normally, childbirth is not painful." She says, "That was just like a bowel movement. I could have had a dozen babies." This is only another example of what can be done if we will live in such a way as to produce a normal state of the body. We can normalize the reproductive function as well as we can normalize any other function in the body, and we can have normal births rather than painful and gory and sometimes deadly experiences. Our ancestors didn't have midwives, and they didn't have physicians, and they didn't have nurses and hospitals to look after their births. They gave birth to their children without aid, just as the Indians used to do. An Indian mother didn't have anybody attend her during the birth of her child. We can bring about normal births in our women if we can interest them in a right way of life. We can restore man to it, the men folks too, to normal conditions if we can interest them in the right way of life. But what do we see today? We see ourselves beginning to degenerate and to deteriorate in early childhood or even in infancy. You see little children starting to school with eye crutches astride their nose. You see them coming into school with the hearing aids. You see them with bow legs and knock knees and stoop shoulders and crooked spines. You find them coming to school with their tonsils removed already, and some of them with other organs removed. There are all kinds of evidences of defects and of deformities and of failure of normal development in them. And it is all because we are not living according to the ways of life that our ancestors lived. We are not obeying the laws of life. We are trying to live artificially, and we have more or less become naturalized in a wrong way of life. But we are paying a severe penalty for that naturalization. When we become ill, what do? We seek out a physician or a doctor of some kind, and we say to him, "I've got pains right here. Can't you do something for it?" Now that is the greatest fallacy in life, that do something fallacy. It doesn't matter what you do so long as you do something. Just do it. It may be harmful. It may be something that produces very undesirable side effects. It may be something to which you're allergic, as they say. It may be something that will produce instantaneous death, but we are satisfied if something is being done, no matter what. We do not go to the men who are supposed to lead us, who are supposed to teach us, who are supposed to know, and say to them, "Why am I suffering? What is the cause of my suffering? And how can I remove that cause to the end that I may recover?" No, we say, "Do something." So if you've got a headache, they do something. They give you an aspirin. You take the aspirin and your nerves are sandbagged into insensibility, and for a short while you're not conscious of your condition. Then the aspirin is eliminated and you've got your headache again, so you take another aspirin. And it goes on until you become an aspirin addict. And then you begin to suffer aspirin headaches. You're in the same boat with the man who has taken morphine until he has become a morphine addict. And he suffers all the tortures of Dante's Inferno with a few that Dante didn't know anything about when he misses his aspirin. But you give him a shot of aspirin, not aspirin but morphine, you give him a shot of morphine, and presto, he's apparently a normal man again. In other words, you re-narcotize him so that he's not conscious of his actual condition and he thinks he's normal. Or the headache that follows the use of coffee, when you miss your coffee. Then a cup of coffee relieves the headache, and you know, well, it was coffee that I needed. Well, you needed it just like the morphine addict needed another shot of morphine. Have you got indigestion? Acid indigestion, they like to say on television and radio. What do you do for it? Do you ask what's causing my indigestion? How can I remove that cause? How can I be free of indigestion? No, you swallow an Alka-Seltzer, or some Pepto-Bismol, or Bellams, or Tums, or something of this type. It gives you a few minutes of relief, but you have to take another pill after the next meal, and after the next meal. And you carry these things around with you in your purses. Are you constipated? Do you ask, why am I constipated? What's causing my constipation? How can I remove this cause to the end that my bowels may function normally? No. You take CC pills or milk of magnesia or some other laxative or cathartic. Or you take an enema or a colonic irrigation. Or you resort to some other means of forcing the bowels to move, which only makes the constipation worse, and you keep on using them year after year and year after year. And you never get well of a simple, uncomplicated constipation. And the men who are giving you these things, and who can't remedy simple indigestion, or simple constipation, or a simple headache, or pimples on the cheeks of a young girl, or even blackheads, are telling you that they're curing 70,000 cases of cancer a year. They can't remedy the simplest of conditions, and they tell you they are curing some of the most complicated forms of pathology that exist. I know what kind of cancers they're curing. Nobody ever cured anything. Curing disease is a voodoo thing. Curing disease is voodooism. Healing is an internal process. It is a biological process. It is not an art. It is not something that somebody does to you or something that somebody does for you. It is something that you do for yourself. The processes of life, the functions of life, the forces of life, acting according to the laws of life, bring about all the healing that ever takes place. In other words, you get well on your own steam and not on the steam of somebody else. I had a young woman come to me some years ago, and she had a large lump in her left breast, nearly as big as a billiard ball. And she says, I've had this lump for 4 months, and it causes me considerable pain. And only a few days ago did I get up enough courage or get enough fright from the propaganda that was carried on to go to a physician, because I was afraid he'd diagnose it cancer. And that's exactly what he did do. He told me I had cancer, and my breast had to come off. Now, this was a beautiful young woman with a beautiful figure and beautiful breasts, and she was only 22 years old, and she had just gotten married a short time before, and she was looking forward to becoming a mother someday, and she wanted those breasts. Well, naturally, they want them anyhow. The Woman's Magazine says, oh, go ahead and cut them off. You can always buy falsies. Well, you can buy them, but they won't serve. So she went to a second physician, and he gave her the same story. Your breasts must come off immediately. A third one said the same thing, and then a fourth one. And then she dropped into my office at 8 o'clock in the evening, on Friday evening. And I told her this is not cancer. Well, it wasn't convincing. After all, I'm not a medical man, and nobody but a medical man is supposed to know anything. All the rest of the world is dumb, ignorant, unintelligent, except medical men. So I said, okay, I've got a friend down the street here about a block and a half who used to be an assistant professor of medicine in the Sorbonne University in Paris. Let's go down and have him look at it. So I took her down to his place, and he looked at it, and he said, no, it's not cancer. Well, now, nobody knew whether it was cancer or not. It was on the inside. You couldn't see it. All we could do was palpate it or feel it. You can't tell cancer always, even with a so-called biopsy. I've had cases where the biopsy said cancer. I've had them to get well in as short a time as a week. Now, those were not cancers, in spite of the biopsy. But nonetheless, she asked the physician, well, then what shall I do? He said, you follow Dr. Shelton's advice, and you'll be all right. 3 days later, on Monday evening, she came walking into the office with her face all wreathed in smiles, and I didn't ask her any questions. I said, sit down and tell me the story. She said, I haven't had any pain in my breast all day. At 5 o'clock, I went to take a bath. I said to my sister, I'd like to feel of that breast and see if that lump is still there, but I'm afraid. And my sister said, oh, don't be a child, go ahead and feel. She felt. There was no lump. She came into the office. I examined her breast. There was no lump. I kept her under my care for 2 more weeks. 13 years later, when I lost contact with her, there had still been no recurrence of the lump. Now, I've had in the course of my 41 years of experience hundreds of cases of lumps in the breast and fibroid tumors of the uterus where operations were urged, even demanded in some cases because the physician was a member of the family, to get well of these conditions in periods of time ranging from 3 days to 7 days to 2 weeks to 3 weeks to 6 weeks, periods like that. I have one woman whose uncle was a physician who demanded that her breast be removed some 18 years ago. Since that time, she has had 5 children. She nursed the first 3 children 2 years each. She nursed the second 2 children 18 months each. The breast they wanted to remove gave an abundance of good milk through each of those 5 nursings. And 17 years have passed since she was a patient of mine, and she's had no recurrence of trouble in the breast from that time to this. Nor has she had any other trouble. She is in excellent health. She has 5 healthy children that are being brought up hygienically, and not one of them has ever known a day of illness. We can have healthy children. We don't have to start them out with humpbacks and crooked spines and bow legs and knock knees and faulty vision and defective hearing. We don't have to remove their tonsils and take out other organs. If we will learn to properly care for those children, beginning before birth and carrying them right on through their infancy and young childhood and on through puberty and adolescence. I see mothers, instead of doing this, drive up to filling stations. I'm not talking about gasoline filling stations now. Order a bottle of Coca-Cola, take the top off of it, put a nursing nipple on it, and give it to their babies in their lap to take Coca-Cola. I see them doing that. Every once in a while we read in the newspapers about some little 3 or 4 or 5-year-old boy or girl that smokes cigarettes or smokes cigars. The parents are apparently very proud of the fact that they've got a dope addict on their hands at such an early age, and they publicize it. We start our children off. Mother Nature does not produce milk for a child during the first 3 or 4 days after birth, but we start feeding them right away. Nature doesn't know what she's doing. Only the nurse and the physician knows. And right away we start them off with sugar and water and with pasteurized milk and canned milks and prepared milks, formulas of one kind or another. We start them off, they come out of the hospital on the assumption that the mother is not going to nurse the child. Actually, they give the mother a can of prepared powdered milk and give her a formula to make it with when she leaves the hospital, and a little book on the care of the baby issued by Parents Magazine. And the more you follow those books and the more you follow that kind of advice, the worse off your child is. I have said to parents over the country for the past 25 years, if you want to have a healthy baby and a healthy child, go to the finest pediatrician you can find. Get all the information he can possibly give you and do exactly opposite to everything he advises. We start them with coffee and tea at a young age. We start them with denatured foods right away. We start feeding them at a time when they don't even have teeth to chew. Mother Nature supplies liquid food for babies until they have a mouthful of teeth. And a baby isn't going to begin to do proper justice to solid foods with its teeth until it's got a mouthful. 2 teeth or 3 teeth or a half a dozen teeth doesn't enable it to chew. I get a lot of people at my place who say, can't you run my food through a blender? I haven't got enough teeth to chew with. And these same people think that babies ought to be fed when they've got solid food, when they've only got a few teeth. And we start feeding them foods that they don't even have digestive enzymes to digest long before they begin to secrete those enzymes. Babies don't secrete enzymes to digest starch until they're 24 months old. And we start them with mashed potatoes when they're only a few weeks old. They can't possibly digest those mashed potatoes. They have gas, and they have diarrhea, and they have hives, and they have other troubles as a consequence of feeding them in this way. We start them off wrong, and they get worse and worse as they go along. They start off with wrong food. They take on Coca-Cola and other soda fountain slops. They fill up with cookies and crackers and ice cream and malted milks and other substances of this kind. They're given drugs when they ought to be given spankings, and they ought never to be spanked, and that means they should never have drugs. They're given milk of magnesia at a young age. And when I was a child, and when some of you people were younger, you remember they used to give them Paragard and laudanum and castor oil and Epsom salts. Now they give them other drugs. And as they grow older, they let them have tea and coffee. And then a little later they get cigarettes and beer. And later they have other substances that they shouldn't be taking. But we today are a nation of drug addicts. And we start the addiction early in life. Just think of the drugs we take. Coffee, tea, chocolate, cocoa, tobacco, the various alcoholic beverages we take, which means alcohol, headache remedies, constipation remedies, antacids. And now we have brought ourselves to the condition that we are so miserable, we are so unhappy, we are so nervous, we are so irritable, that we have become a nation of tranquilizer addicts. Then when we get so bad that they have to send us to an institution for mental diseases, they give us shock treatments. And they just keep shocking us until they make our brains look like sponges. All you have to do is see a few autopsies of these brains where the people have had shock treatments, and you see them look like a sponge. Blood clots in them. You can't damage people into good health, whether their troubles are said to be mental illness or physical illness. Damaging people does not restore health. The healthy need helpful things. They need healthful things. They need the normal elements of health, not causes of disease, in order that they may be restored to health. And yet when we become ill, this is what we resort to. Instead of supplying the body with the normal, necessary, and primordial requisites of organic existence, in proper quantities and qualities, in proper proportions, or within the capacity of the organism to make use of them, we resort to substances that are known to produce disease in the well. We don't take those things upon which health depends in order to restore health, but we take those things that we know will produce disease if given to the well. And we think that by making the man sicker, we're going to make him well. And for 2,400 years we've been doing this. Medicine came into existence about 24 to 2,500 years ago. It didn't make a great deal of headway with the people. Only the wealthy and the kings and the nobles and so forth employed physicians on up until the very beginning of the Dark Ages. Mankind continued to depend upon diet and fasting and rest and sleep and exercise and cleanliness right down to the beginning of the Dark Ages, when he was ill and when he was well. In the Dark Ages, the priests took most care of the sick, with prayers, with ceremony, with relics of the saints, with visits to shrines, with church sleep. They took care of the sick. There were very few physicians in existence, and their prices were very high. The poor people couldn't afford them, and they depended upon the priestcraft for care when they were ill. And whatever we may think of it, this is a fact. The priestcraft did about as well as the physicians are doing today, and probably a little better. With the coming of the Renaissance, medicine became a factor in life, and it has increased its dominance over life from the Renaissance down to the present. And now we have, it's in my lifetime this has developed. We've got the idea now that our very existence depends upon a physician. I remember when I was a boy, if we ran a nail through our foot, we pulled it out and put a piece of fat meat on it and bound it up, or squirted some turpentine on it, or some kerosene or something of the kind, and went on about our business. Nowadays, if we scratch our finger with a pin, We run to a physician and get an anti-tetanus shot and an antiseptic. In those days, if a child was ill, mother gave it an herb tea, which wasn't any good, but it certainly wasn't nearly as poisonous as some of the things that they're being given today. She cared for it. A child was not taken to a physician unless he was seriously ill. Now we run to physicians as though our very lives depend on their existence. It is estimated, and I don't know how accurate the estimate is, and I don't know anybody who does, it is estimated that man has been on the earth 1 million years. I'm inclined to think it's a little short of that, but that's the estimate. At any rate, we've had a medical profession for about 24 to 2,500 years. If man has been here for 1 million years, the existence of the medical profession is less than a second on man's day on the earth. Less than a second. Throughout all that long period of time that elapsed from the time he first appeared upon this earth until the medical profession came into existence, he got along without physicians, without midwives, without psychiatrists, without psychologists, without dentists, and without all the other members of the disease trades that exploit the sick today. He multiplied. He spread over the earth. He navigated rivers. He navigated oceans. He built cities. He invented boats, bows and arrows, wheels. He domesticated horses and cows and camels. Finally, he domesticated man himself. And he did all this he invented language. And some of the languages of the peoples of the past are so much more complex than ours that ours looks like a degenerate language rather than something to be proud of. And he did all this without the aid of the members of the disease trades. He enjoyed a health that we don't have. Today, there is a question mark after life. Some of us doubt that it's worth living. And some of us get so doubtful of it that we commit suicide. As a matter of fact, there's a certain sense in which we all do. There are 3 ways of dying. You die by accident, or somebody shoots you. You get hit by a car. You fall from a building or something of the kind. You die by accident. This is the least popular means of dying. The next method of dying is that of suicide. You shoot yourself. You drown yourself. You open an artery and bleed to death. You poison yourself, or in some other way you kill yourself. There are lots of people doing that. That's suicide. Then there is autocide. Autocide is the means of dying which most people use. It is slow death, taking years to do it, but you bring about your premature death by your violations of the laws of life. That's autocide. Now when they dig up the remains of our primitive ancestors, they find that they were more, so far as their bones show, they were better specimens than we are. They had larger and stronger bones than we have. They had bigger brains than we have. Now consider this fact. Muscle size is correlated with brain size. This means those people with the larger bones had larger muscles. They were stronger and more vigorous than we are. You read in the Bible about David slaying a lion with his bare hands. In Greek mythology, you read about men killing lions with their bare hands. Do you believe it? When you think of the mighty strength that those ancestors of ours must have had with those big bones, and the mighty muscles they had that were correlated with that bone size, it does not seem at least bit unreasonable or far-fetched. We may assume, I believe, that those same ancestors that had such good bones and such good teeth that lasted throughout life also had good vision and good hearing and good health. They had a degree of health and of vigor and of stamina that we today don't even dare dream about. instead of depending upon artificial and harmful ways of life, and seeking for poisons with which to counteract the effects of that way of life, it behooves us as intelligent people to study the laws of life, to understand them, and to apply them in our daily living to the end that we too may have health, that within a few generations, and we can't do it in one, mankind may be restored to pristine vigor and health such as our primitive ancestors knew. It hasn't been many decades ago that Indians in this country would start a deer in the morning and run him down and catch him before nightfall. And you run half a block for a streetcar or a bus, and you puff and blow like a steam engine. You're shaky and tired all day long. And yet those Indians were not the equal of those primitive ancestors of ours. They too had slipped downhill during the course of the ages. And they had slipped downhill because they also had slipped away in many particulars from a normal way of life. Now hygiene, the hygienic way of life, is merely a revival of man's pristine mode of living. It is an effort to get back to the way of life that man lived before he built an artificial civilization, before he acquired all of his vices and vicious habits, and before he learned to depend upon poisons as the only way that the sick can get well. I get questions once in a while in these lectures about spring water. Should we drink spring water? Now, of course, there are all kinds of springs. Some of them have soft, pure water, and some of them have waters that are so foul that the cows won't drink them. If a water is so foul that the cows won't drink it, it's a good medicine. Isn't that a ridiculous idea that we've developed, that things that are obnoxious to our senses, to our instincts, to are the only things that nature equipped us with which to protect ourselves, these are the things that we should take to restore us to health when we become ill. We take a drug and it comes up immediately. Why? Because it's a poison. We take another one and it's sent out very rapidly through the bowels in a diarrhea. Why? Because it's a poison. We take another one and the kidneys throw it out very rapidly in diuresis. Why? Because it's a poison. The body throws these things out to save its life. And we think that by taking substances that the body must get rid of quickly or die, we're going to restore ourselves to health. Somebody gives you a shot of penicillin and a few seconds later you're dead. They say you were sensitive or hypersensitive to penicillin. Or you break out with a rash and they say you're allergic to penicillin. Or you develop asthma and they say you're allergic to penicillin. Allergic my eye. Penicillin is a virulent poison. Everybody is allergic in that sense. Everybody is subject to poisoning by penicillin. Now, how can you give substances to people that produce disease and expect it to produce health? Let us learn to use healthful things as a means back to health and as a means of preserving health. One of the beauties of hygiene is this, that when you have learned how to restore your health by hygienic means, you have by that same lesson learned how to preserve that health, because health is preserved and health is restored by the same means. The reason you are unable to depend upon healthful means of restoring health is that you believe or have been taught to believe, and it's a brainwashing process. You have been taught to believe that you have to be cured. And the more desperate the disease, the more desperate the remedy. You have been taught not to depend upon your own resources, upon your own processes of life, which are the only things that can really restore you to health. The only things in this world that can purify your bloodstream are your own eliminating organs. The only things in this world that can nourish your body are your own nutritive organs. The only thing that can build up a weakened and wasted muscle is your own process of nutrition. The things our bodies can use in sickness as in health are the normal elements of life. The food and the air and the water and the warmth and the sunshine and the activity and the rest and the sleep and the cleanliness and the mental poise with which health is synthesized. The needs of our body do not undergo any radical change when we become ill. It is not true that we need food when we're well and poison when we're sick, that we need cabbage when we're well and arsenic when we're ill. This is not true. Our bodies can no more make use of arsenic or penicillin or streptomycin in a state of sickness than they can make use of these same poisons in a state of health. But they can make use of the normal elements of life in both conditions. Now, we live only because, and we came into existence only because we have these things. The fertilized ovum cannot develop into a baby without food and water and air and sunshine and so on. The baby cannot develop into a full-grown adult, man or woman, without these same elements. The living organism cannot repair or replace its daily wear and tear without these same elements. It cannot repair a broken bone or heal a wound without these same elements. It cannot reproduce itself without them. These are the very things upon which life itself depends. And these are the only things that the body can make use of, well or sick. There is nothing else in this universe that can supply the needs of life except these normal elements of life. And it is upon these that we must depend to keep us well. It is upon these that we must depend to get us well. We have to make adjustments. We have to adapt these ends to our needs under the varying and various circumstances and conditions of life in both health and in sickness. There is a time to eat and a time not to eat, a time to exercise and a time not to exercise, a time to rest and a time not to rest. You wouldn't take a person suffering with pneumonia or with typhoid fever and give him an axe or a hoe and put him out to work. You'd give him rest. There are times when we need rest and we should not exercise. In like manner, there are times when we should abstain from food. The Journal of the American Medical Association for January 23, 1960, carries an item which is a condensed item from the Journal of Metabolism for September 1959, entitled or headed, Overcoming Dread of Fasting. In that article, it is stated that if they had given more attention to their Bible, they would have known that prolonged fasting is not difficult, that it is not injurious, that it may actually prove beneficial. They say in there that after the initial day or two, there is no longer any trouble from hunger. Now, the Bible does not reveal all these things. They also mention in that item that prolonged fasting does not produce deficiency disease. There is no mention of deficiency disease in the Bible. The Bible has frequent references to fasting. There is only one instance in that entire Bible where there is any reference to fasting in connection with disease. Jesus tells his disciples on one occasion when they come to cast out the devil out of a sick person, "This kind cometh not out save by prayer and fasting." And that's the only place where it's mentioned in connection with disease. But there are numerous fasts, some of them of 40 days each, besides that of Jesus. And we think of the fast of Jesus as being a miracle. I have had one patient to fast 90 days. I've had a number to go beyond 60 and one to go 78 days. I don't think it was a miracle in the case of Jesus any more than in the case of these. In fasting we live upon food, but it is food that we have stored within our body to meet emergencies with. It is food that the body can make use of under certain circumstances and conditions of life with greater efficiency and greater ease and less tax upon itself than it can take the raw materials of food and work them over. So in certain conditions, like severe wounds and like acute disease, old Mother Nature cuts off the desire for food. She hangs out a sign here at the portal saying closed for repairs. And when you take food in spite of it, she just dumps it out right quick. There is a time to fast. In other words, to take a physiological rest. Even chronic disease. One of the chief complaints of chronic sufferers is that I've lost my appetite. They lost it at the table, and if they'll just remain away from the table for a few days, they'll find it again. How simple it all is, this forcing people to eat. Tell them they've got to eat. If they're sick, you've got to eat to keep up your strength. You must eat to build resistance to disease. Now ask yourself this question. If eating builds strength, how do the well-fed become weak? If eating builds resistance, how do the well-fed become sick? If eating builds strength, how do fasting patients grow stronger while fasting? Now, not all of them do that, but many of them do. I've had them to come to my place and crawl up the front steps to get it because they were too weak to walk. And within a week, without food, they were running up those steps. I've had them come there that we brought in on a stretcher, and they couldn't walk, much less crawl. Crawl, much less walk, I should say. And within a few days of fasting, they were walking again. I had one man that came into my place who was so weak that he couldn't go from his room to the bathroom without assistance. And he was eating 3 square meals a day and was overweight. I put him on a fast. He was upstairs. He fasted for 2 weeks. He fasted longer than that. But at the end of 2 weeks, the man was walking downstairs, going around the house to the solarium, taking a sun bath, coming back around the house and going upstairs without assistance. We broke his fast on the 55th day, and he was still doing it. 55 days without food, and he was stronger than he was on the days he was eating 3 meals a day. If eating builds strength, how do these weaklings become strong while they're not eating? It is high time that we lose our fear of missing a few meals. Missing a few meals is often the difference between living and dying. Now, our Catholic friends have set aside a certain time of the year that they call Lent, during which they fast. But this is not the kind of fast I'm talking about. This is abstinence from flesh. And I have plenty of Catholic friends who gain weight during Lent. I have a few Catholic friends who actually fast during Lent. They abstain from all food. The Mohammedans have, about the same time of year, they have their fast of Ramadan. They don't eat all day long, but they glorify their appetites during the night season. They feast all night. This isn't fasting either. By fasting, we mean in abstinence from all food except water. And you'd be amazed at the results that the body can produce. Not the fast. Fasting doesn't do anything. Fasting is merely a cessation of doing. The body does its own healing. Fasting cures nothing. It heals nothing. It does nothing. The body does. The living organism does. The processes of life, the functions of life, these do the work. They do the healing. They do the eliminating of toxins. And you'd be amazed at the things the body can do for itself when you get out of the way and give it an opportunity. There are millions of people in this world today who are keeping themselves sick by keeping themselves pickled in drugs. All they need to do to get well, and sometimes to get well so quickly that they think a miracle has happened. They go to a Christian Science practitioner and she says, "Now you stop taking those drugs and I'll read you out of Science and Health." And she reads a few times, and what he's actually done is he's pickling his tissues in poison, and he gets well in a hurry, and, well, Christian Science did a remarkable job. And so it did. It stopped him from taking drugs. It stopped the man from poisoning himself and from perpetuating his trouble by the very thing that was causing it. And now for just a little joke before I quit. 2 salesmen were driving down a narrow roadway, each one of them in his separate car. And the salesman in the rear wanted to pass, and he honked his horn. And the salesman in the front gave no attention to him, so he honked again and again. And the man in front yelled at him and shouted at him, and they got to arguing back and forth. And during the course of their arguments, they discovered that each one of them was a salesman. Finally, the man in front said, "What kind of a salesman are you?" And the man in the rear says, "I'm a drug salesman." So the man in front pulled over to the side, and he said, "Well, you go ahead then. You go ahead. I'm a tombstone salesman." Now, I'll close here and let Mr. Cheatham take over, and I'll answer your questions as far as we can when he's through.
If a person has not lived according to the laws of nature and is really ill, do you believe you can bring this patient back to health within a reasonably short time by following natural laws anew?
I didn't tell you the things I believe. I've been in practice for 41 years. In that time, I've cared for between 30 and 35,000 patients. I know what we can do. I've seen cases that were pronounced hopelessly incurable, restored to excellent health. I know that sometimes we get cases that have already reached the stage of irreversibility, and nothing will bring them back to health. But I also know that before they reach that stage, they can all be restored to health if they will adopt a hygienic plan and stick to it.
Is it dangerous for a 65-year-old man to undergo a fast for colitis and symptoms of a stomach ulcer?
I've fasted patients as late as 85 years in life. I don't believe I've had anybody older than that to take care of. They fast very well. Colitis and gastric ulcers both heal up rapidly enough on a fast. The present method of treating gastric ulcers is to give analgesics, antacids, and various other drugs, sippy diets, bland diets, feed every 2 hours during the day and night, operate after they've cured the case 9 times, and then take out part of the stomach, and then the next year take out the rest of the stomach. You put a patient on a fast who has a gastric ulcer or a duodenal ulcer, and there is an increase in pain for the first 3 days and sometimes for the first 4 days. And sometimes there is no increase in pain at all. But by the 4th or 5th day, pain begins to subside, and there's a day-by-day lessening of pain until one fine morning you walk into the patient's room and he says, "I slept all night and I have no pain," and he has no pain thereafter. And after that, he can eat any wholesome food, and he can eat a large meal, and he doesn't have to eat sippy diets and bland diets. He doesn't have to take drugs for relief of pain. He is well. I have patients that recovered by hygienic means as far long ago as 30 years that are still free of ulcer. I've had patients. I had one that had an ulcer, been suffering with ulcers for 30 years. I've got one in my place now, came in from Chicago, that had ulcers for 15 years. He's free of ulcers. He is recuperating now from a lengthy fast. He has no ulcer. If he takes care of himself as he's instructed in the health school, he will remain free of ulcer for the balance of his life. Colitis, so-called mucus colitis, and ulcerative colitis both get well equally as well and almost as rapidly in a fast as does the gastric ulcer. Now, after you're well of these things, if resting, mental, physical, and physiological resting, have enabled the body to restore the integrity of its tissues and restore its functioning efficiency, then if you will live correctly thereafter, you will not again build your trouble. We build our own diseases. We are the architects of our own miseries. We have been taught for so long to blame our troubles on God, on devils, on demons, on the stars, on germs, on viruses, on everything but our own selves, that we don't like to assume responsibility for our conditions, and yet we are responsible.
Do you take or use or recommend organic vitamins or synthetic vitamins?
I do not take, I do not use, and I do not recommend organic vitamins and synthetic vitamins, except those organic vitamins that come to you in foods. Extracted vitamins lose much in the process of extraction. Sometimes they lose everything. Take, for example, the vitamin C in alfalfa. They cut the alfalfa and they leave it in the field to dry. They lose 70% of the alfalfa the first day. They turn it over the next day to dry the other side, and they lose the rest of it. That's just the vitamin C. But then they powder this stuff and press it into pellet form and put it in storage, and it deteriorates in storage so that by the time you get it, there isn't much vitamin left.
If you have already took dope like cortisone that's left all the side effects, one is water in the tissues, what should I do?
Well, the first thing is to stop taking cortisone. Don't expect to get over the effect side or otherwise of cortisone so long as you continue to take it. It's like trying to sober up a drunk man while he continues to drink. It just isn't possible. It's like trying to remedy any trouble without removing its cause is the same as trying to sober up a drunk man while he continues to drink. It's like trying to heal a burnt finger while you keep it in the fire. It can't be done. Remove cause first. And in this case, your cortisone is the cause of your so-called side effects. The next thing is to give yourself sufficient physical, mental, sensory, and physiological rest for the elimination of the cortisone and the effects of it, and then adopt a hygienic way of life.
How can you replace antibiotics with your method?
We don't want to replace them. They are the efforts to replace nature's own methods. Our methods, the hygienic methods, are the originals. They're the ones that man used, and all the animal kingdom used. They're part of life. As I tried to point out, any effort to use anything else is the effort to replace the normal ways of life with abnormal ways, the wholesome ways with the unwholesome, the non-toxic with the toxic. The antibiotics are simply toxic substances. Their very term antibiotic means opposed to life. And while they try to make you think that they're opposed only to bacterial life, they're also opposed to cellular life. And the number of deaths that have occurred from the use of antibiotics throughout the world, and nobody knows how many, those that have been reported are supposed to be only a small percentage of what have actually occurred, have amounted to a worldwide slaughter. We don't want to replace a thing like that with something equally as slaughterous, but we want to replace them, or rather displace them, by a return to the normal ways of life.
What do you know of the Hunza tribe in Asia in the Himalaya Mountains?
Well, I've never been to the Hunza tribe in the Himalaya Mountains, and most of the people who write about the Hunzas haven't been there either. A British physician connected with the British Army made the studies of the Hunzas, and he wrote extensively on it. And most of the people who are writing on the Hunzas are merely cribbing off of McCarrison's work without giving all of the details. The Hunzas they're not anymore. The Hunzas have become civilized, and they're now drinking Coca-Cola and eating white bread. But they were a healthy people. They were a vigorous people. But they maintained that health and vigor by several ways. Their foods were organically grown on good soil. Their foods were eaten largely raw. They were chiefly vegetarians, eating little fresh foods. They lived an active outdoor life. They lived a very simple life. They let all of their unfit die at birth, like the Spartans used to do. They reared none of their unfit. They were an inbred people. We look like a nation of dunghills. We are so crossed and crisscrossed and recrossed and crossed some more that we do not have standardized organisms like those people have.
Is it possible to effect a cure for diabetes through natural hygiene methods?
Curing disease, as I told you before, is voodooism. Hygiene is not a curing program. It does not possess a grab bag full of cures, nor an assorted collection of therapeutic modalities. Hygiene is a way of life. We live ourselves into sickness. We live ourselves into health. It's a way of life, not a curing program. We cure nothing. It would be well if the word cure could be blotted out of the English language and the conception of curing disease could be forgotten. Diabetes is like all other troubles. You will get well of diabetes when you remove its causes. Now, I haven't checked on it recently, but the textbooks on the practice of medicine used to give as a cause of diabetes Jewish race. So when I was in New York recently, one of my Jewish friends who specializes in Jewish humor said that when a Gentile gets thirsty, he takes a drink of water. And when a Jew gets thirsty, he has his urine now analyzed for sugar. There is a lot of diabetes among them, due, of course, to their faulty eating habits. And the books used to give not only Jewish race, but male sex. It was dangerous to be a Jew, and it was dangerous to be a male. At that time, there was very little diabetes among women, and there was much diabetes among men. But now I believe there's a little more diabetes among the women than there is among men, according to the statistics. So I guess we could include female sex as one of the causes of diabetes. Now, isn't it ridiculous to pick out race, sex, and things of this kind as causes of disease? And I remember the textbooks used to say that, with reference to rheumatism, that vigor or strength was one of the causes. It was dangerous to be strong. It was dangerous to have vigor. You'd like to have rheumatism. I refuse to accept diabetic cases who have had insulin for 2 years or more. Now, this is for the reason that the use of insulin brings about so much deterioration in the islands of Langerhans and the pancreas that they don't have anything to fall back upon when you take them off insulin. But if they haven't had insulin for prolonged periods of time and have still got something to fall back upon so they can produce their own insulin, in most cases it is possible to restore their islands of Langerhans to health so that they can produce enough insulin to meet their own requirements.
I have sharp pains in the head, sides, and front of head. Bad eyes, can't see much, bad liver, don't sleep much, and very nervous. What should I do?
I once saw an account in a publication of a physician who had a woman patient who was crying and crying for days. He collected some of her teardrops and sent them to the laboratory and had them analyzed. He found out that the teardrops were composed of water and a few saline substances, but he didn't find out what was causing the woman to cry. I knew of another case where a person was ill, and the physician took the urine of the patient and sent it to the laboratory and had it analyzed. He found that there was sugar in the urine. He decided the patient had diabetes, which is a name. And the woman says, well, what causes diabetes? He said, we don't know. The analysis of the urine had failed to show cause. Now, this person has headaches, has eye strain, has liver trouble, doesn't feel well. He's given me some symptoms. He says, what shall I do? In the course of the talk, I mentioned the necessity for removing cause. Now, what is cause? We don't find cause by analyzing teardrops, or analyzing urine, or analyzing secretions and excretions. These do not reveal causes. These reveal effects, results, endpoints. We find cause by analyzing the patient's mode of living. When you come to me for care, we sit down together, and we take plenty of time to go over your total mode of life, your eating habits, your drinking habits, your sex habits, your emotional habits, your working habits, your breathing habits, your sleeping habits, and all the other habits of life. And when we get through, I can say to you, now here are the things that you're doing that you should not do. And here are the things that you're leaving undone that you should do. In other words, I can pick out in your mode of living your sins of omission and your sins of commission against your body. These are the things that are causing your trouble. These are the things that must be corrected. Just giving me your symptoms tells me very little about you. The symptoms that you enumerate may be due to overeating. They may be due to drug habits. They may be due to emotional causes. They may be due to a collection of various causes. These causes have to be ferreted out and removed or corrected in all conditions, whether it's a corn due to pressure of the shoe on the toe, or a cold due to overeating, or some other trouble due to something else. Cause must be found and removed first. Regardless of the trouble, regardless of the symptoms, regardless of the location in the body, removal of cause is your primary consideration. If you do not remove cause, there is no possibility of recovery. Symptoms may be suppressed, symptoms may be palliated, but if cause is not removed, health is not restored.
I have frequent pain in the heart area. The physician I go to has performed several EKG, whatever that is. What does that mean?
Electrocardiogram.
Electrocardiographs. What can be done about this pain without the use of shots and drugs?
Well, now, what has he told you is wrong with your heart? I judge from the fact that he hasn't told you, or you didn't put it in here, that he hasn't found anything wrong with your heart. Pains in the region of the heart mean heart trouble very rarely. Neuritis, neuralgia, so-called muscular rheumatism, gas pressure, and various other causes produce these pains that we imagine are due to heart trouble. You can have serious heart trouble without the pains. You can have the pains without the heart trouble. So before we undertake to tell you what to do and how to do it, we better know just exactly what your trouble is.
Is there anything that can be done for hypothyroidism besides just taking the thyroid tablets? I am a young person, and at one time my basic metabolism was a minus 27. Do you know of any cases whereby the thyroid gland has started functioning again by itself?
When you have hypothyroidism, the thyroid gland is already functioning. It's just not functioning enough. Our present way of dealing with glandular troubles is not to try to restore the glands to normal, but to try to substitute for their functions. It's the same way with vision. We're not interested in normalizing vision. We saddle the nose with a pair of eye crutches. We're not interested in restoring normal function in any part of the body. We seek substitutes for it. Now they're trying to find a substitute for a heart. So you can wear an artificial heart and carry a little battery around with you to keep it running. They're trying to find artificial kidneys so you can do away with your kidneys. Substitutes for normal structures and substitutes for normal functions is our present ideal. If we remove the causes that have impaired glandular function and supply the conditions of health, the glands will become healthful and they will again function in a normal way. Now all of our glands can do far more function than normally we need. All parts of our body have the capacity to do more, carry on more function than we need. The heart can do 13 times as much work as the ordinary activities of life entail. The kidneys can do more function. The islands of Langerhans can function more than we need to carry on the normal activities of life. We can lose part of them and still have enough function if we keep them in health. But we're not doing that. We're not trying to restore them to health. We're not trying to normalize them. We're trying to find substitutes for their function. So when we have hypothyroidism, we call upon the bulls and goats of Armour and Company and Swift and Company for substitutes for our own secretions.
What about the seeds of melons, pumpkins, grapes, etc.? Are they a good food?
All seeds contain food value. All seeds are stored food, except for the germ that becomes the new plant. They are food that is stored up upon which that plant feeds in the very beginning of its germination. They contain proteins, they contain carbohydrates, they contain minerals, they contain vitamins, so that they all have food value. Now some of them, not all seed should be used as food because some seeds are poisonous to us. But the non-poisonous seeds like the pumpkin seed and the watermelon seed and the grape seed and so forth can be used as food. I don't know that we need to. You go into Mexico where they use far more seed than we do, and the stores are just full of all kinds of seeds that they use. And pumpkin seed and sunflower seed and so forth. The sunflower seed were used by the American Indians. They've been used in Russia for ages. Europe used a lot of them. They're good food. Many seeds that we don't use are good foods. All those that we do use are good to nearly good. We use various kinds of cereals, they're all seeds. We use various kinds of legumes, beans and peas, they're all seeds. We use a lot of seed.
I have an itch on my back and at the hairline on my neck. Any suggestions?
Well, I could say scratch it. But that only calls for more scratching. Scratching seems to have a tendency to develop an addiction. The best thing is to get rid of the toxic condition that is behind the irritation, the pruritus, and perhaps also the inflammation, or eruption. And that is best done by a change of the way of life. The quickest way to get rid of your toxic state, of course, is by physiological rest.
Will you tell us how the best way to reduce, especially when doctors have told me it was gland trouble and always gave me thyroid tablets?
Well, now, there's nothing like having glands if you're fat. You need something to blame it on. Most fat people contend that they do not eat much. The fat just jumps on them in the dark. It's certainly nice to have heredity and glands to blame our fat on. When I was living on the farm as a boy, we used to fatten hogs. We didn't bother about the glands except the digestive glands. We worked them to death. We fed them to put on fat. If we didn't want them to get fat, we didn't feed them so much. Now, there's no more rapid way of reducing weight and no more safe way of reducing weight than by fasting. You go on a reducing diet and you take a long time to lose a little weight. And your skin doesn't reduce as rapidly as your body, so it falls and wrinkles and folds. But you go on a fast and you lose weight rapidly and the skin comes down with the body so that you don't have those wrinkles and folds. Now, that's true of a young person. Of an older person, that's not true. The skin doesn't come down as fast as the body does in the older person. But there's no more. I've seen losses of weight of 4 to 6 pounds a day for the first few days of a fast. I saw one woman, on the other hand, who had a very low rate of metabolism, and she fasted 50 days and lost 12.5 pounds, a rate of 1/4 of a pound a day for the whole period of the fast. I mean, an average of that.
Well, that concludes the questions, Doctor, and thank you.
We have one more here.
Just a minute, we have one more here. What can one do to treat arthritis by natural hygiene?
About 6 years ago, a man came in to see me who lives in San Antonio. And this was about his condition. With a cane. And he couldn't turn his head more than this. And he was in severe pain. He was a bacteriologist. He had had arthritis for 28 years. I looked him over and I said, I do not know that we can remedy all of your trouble. There are probably changes in some of these joints that cannot be reversed. And it's going to take you a minimum of 2 years to recover your health. He said, 2 years? I've been at it for 28 years. 2 more years won't make a great deal of difference. It took him 4 years to get to the point that he is now. He is nearly straight. He is not completely straight. He walks well. He walks without cane or crutch. He is working. He's been working heavily for more than 2 years. He had, during that period of time, 3 lengthy fasts and several short ones. He was, between fasts, he was on a very strict hygienic diet. He had exercise and sun baths. And to look at him, except for the fact that he is not completely straight, to watch him get around, to watch him get out, in and out of his car, and to look at the beautiful, clear complexion that he has, and the appearance of health, you wouldn't think there was anything wrong with him except for that tooth. Now, this is merely an extreme case of many cases of arthritis that I've cared for during the past 41 years. Not every case of arthritis can get well, because some of them, by the time they reach me, but some of them make such quick recoveries that it makes my head swim. The cases that recover, that give us the most trouble in recovery, are those that have had actin cortisone. They are slower in recovering and give us more trouble if they've had these drugs, and the more they've had, the slower they are. Aspirin doesn't seem to have a great deal of effect in slowing up their recovery, but cortisone and ACTH does.
Before we conclude, I would like to just remind you that this evening our lecture will start promptly at 7:30, just as it did this afternoon. The title of the lecture is The Basis of Physical Vigor. I want to again urge you to bring your friends.